Welcome everybody. And we have it's such an interesting time. It's such an interesting time. We're going to be talking about the myth of World War II and what is evil and why those two things happen to be tied together in our world, right? For what we'll call very bad reasons. Bad reasoning for sure. I've got my Muppet cup. Hopefully you have a Muppet cup as well. If you do not, you can get one at the store. And this has just been coming up more and more pretty much everywhere, or at least maybe not that directly, but the sort of fraying of this myth has been absolutely everywhere. And a lot of things are being revealed, right? The flatness of the world. Carl Benjamin's been on several rants. He's doing a stream of "we just want to be left alone." It's like, but you weren't born alone, and you're not going to die alone, and you're not going to have been alone in the middle. It's a very optimistic take on the world. We want to be left alone. Probably not, was not in the cards, as we say. So we're going to start with some Nassim Taleb. We're going to turn to some random page here and see what we got. Social media are severely antisocial. Health foods are empirically unhealthy. Knowledge workers are very ignorant. And social sciences aren't scientific at all. And this is why I love Nassim Taleb. All of that is ridiculously correct. Before we sort of jump in to things, maybe we should talk about what a myth is and why we care, because that'll help us to frame exactly what it is I'm talking about, and then, why I'm going into it this way, right? So a myth is a way of tying things together for us because we suck at it. We suck at tying things together, at seeing the big picture, because we're not big creatures at the end of the day, right? You're one human in a sea of many. That's why you can't be left alone, Carl Benjamin. And we interact quite a bit. We're cooperative creatures, and we like to cooperate. We cooperate quite readily. And that fact of us being tied together means that we need a way to tie ourselves to the world and ourselves to each other and ourselves to nature. Without that, we can't function, or at least we can't function very well. And so myths in that sense are inevitable. And they use or create, depending upon how you look at it, symbolism to do this, right? So there's this symbolic interaction that happens, and that's where symbols come from. They are both formed by and form myths because they're ways of connecting things together that otherwise cannot be easily connected together. And we need that tying together because it just turns out that if you try to live alone in nature, you'll die. And you will procreate. So it just turns out the fact that we have a society and a culture, and there are buildings and houses and electricity and internet is a function of the myths that we tell. And you can see sort of the failure of a mini myth or a mini system. I mean, myths are not systems, right? Systems are purely human-made. Myths are not actually human-made at all. They're observations about a larger world. But you can see sort of Jordan Peterson coming to an end, if you will, in that the things that Jordan Peterson brought to the table had a sell-by date, a shelf life, and sort of the irony here is that someone like Paul Vanderklay, my friend Pastor Paul, seemed to see this. Right? He said early on, and many times, like he wanted to catch people where Peterson left them off. And I thought that was a good goal. And I tried to help him with that. And that didn't work for whatever silly reason. It turns out he didn't actually want help doing that. He wanted help doing something else entirely different. I don't know what that was. Hasn't done anything in 8 years. So it's sort of hard to say what's going on there. But he correctly identified the gap. But no one and nothing filled that gap. Lack of leadership, right? Peterson didn't have leadership, didn't want leadership. Peter didn't want leadership due to the myth of World War II, interestingly. So we'll circle back around to that. And so his little system of helping people had an end. And a lot of people want to go back. I mean, Paul just did a video on this today, which I happen to watch because it's only 35 minutes. 10 minutes too long, buddy. 10 minutes too long. Got another 10 minutes off those videos. It'll help. So it had a sell-by date because of the lack of leadership, among other things, and no one else picked up the mantle, or some people tried, right? There was rebel wisdom and things like that. There's some in John Vervaeke's work where he, tried, but then subsequently seemingly abandoned some of that work. I tried to work with the Vervaeke Foundation. That didn't work out. A year of effort wasted. Very unfortunate. You can see how these things, when they run out of steam, if you will, or momentum, I have to do that video at some point. This is what happens. There's a failure, things stop, they end, right? And there's a problem inherent in that. And so the myth enchants the world, right? It holds our symbols and it connects things for us when we cannot. That's what Peterson did. He used his psychology to connect the world, to connect you to the world and you to yourself. That's the big five. And so almost mythical, but not quite. And he did re-enchant things, like the biblical stories, right? Because he tied that in. And so it's almost a myth. It almost enchants the world, or we'll say enchants the world enough. But the myth of World War II, which has been upon us all along, everybody that's alive pretty much is stuck in this myth, has a bunch of side effects. And the results of one of those side effects, I'm kind of seeing all over the place. So today, in fact, this morning, there was a tweet by a guy named Dan Talks, and Dan Talks 1 at Dan Talks 1. I'll just read part of the tweet. The rest of the tweet is wrong, unfortunately. But, it's close. Like, people are getting closer, kind of, to the enchanted world, to the hierarchy. He starts with, "This is the most ruthless post I have and probably ever will do. And this is the intellectual skeleton key to turning the West around." Yeah, no, definitely not. "There are a few posts that will change your perception of the world. This is one of them." I certainly hope not, because a lot of what he says in the post is wrong. But the following that he says is quite correct. "There is no such thing as migrant crime. There is no such thing as migrant rapes, thefts, scams, or murders. Crime is when somebody within your tribe or in-group violates the rules that your own tribe has created. These are not universals. Rather, idealized preferences," that's also wrong, "that you have as a Westerner in a Western country." That's also wrong, because laws are everywhere. It could just be him being sloppy. "These are not, quote, real." Oh, yes, they are. "They are preferences." Oh, no, they're not. "As to how you want your society to function." Okay. And he goes on and he talks about humans being tribal and we're not individuals. That's good, although he puts individuals in quotes. But his basic point is correct. And the question is, how did we get to the point where we think migrants should be subject to our protections under our laws? Because laws are designed to protect the people, at least in the United States. Maybe not in Europe, by the way. That might be important. So the question is, how do we get to this? Well, we got to this through human rights. Oh, where the hell does the concept of human rights come from? Well, human rights is a trick, and it's tied up in the myth of World War II. So I want you to keep in mind this idea about human rights. Humans, by the way, while we have tribes, we are not fundamentally tribal. That is just a silly way to speak about the world and completely wrong. Tribalism exists within human groups. That's a better way to say it. But lots of other things also exist within human groups. You can't reduce it to tribalism. Reduction is the problem of the myth of World War II. So the myth of World War II took all rights and elevated them to all humans without defining those rights, by the way, ever, to put war criminals on trial. This was to assuage our guilt at not preventing something seen as preventable in hindsight. The flat world has brought upon us the curses of materialism and knowledge. And now we're stuck with these curses of materialism and knowledge as the highest value, the age of gnosis. Welcome to the age of gnosis. It was always there, but it becomes a big problem in the flat world created by the myth of World War II. And one thing that you'll hear in the myth of World War II as it continues to collapse effectively, and it's collapsing, it's coming to its sell-by date or its end date because effectively it can't hold us anymore. The lies perpetrated to get this idea of human rights across are becoming obvious and affecting the world in ways that are so negative that they can't be denied any longer. Seeing that particularly in the UK. But our problems, because you're going to hear this a lot, are not time issues. Not like, well, those things functioned during the 20th century. We're in the 21st. That's a dumb way to talk. That is wrong. The issue is good and bad. And we don't know the difference. And we don't know the difference because we're not judging, because we're told not to judge, which is an incorrect misinterpretation of the Bible. Basically, among other things, among a bunch of other concepts, so you don't have to judge because the truth is obvious, because there's an objective material reality, and that's where the truth is. And if you don't know it, that's okay. The science people will tell you because they're very big on that. Also, they seem to be power-hungry psychopaths, but that's a different issue. We won't discuss that today. But we don't know the difference between good and bad. It's not a time issue. In the past, we knew good and bad. And then when you had good and bad as ways of understanding the world, the laws and rules don't matter so much because you can apply them fairly and correctly. But you can't do that if you don't have good and bad. I mean, you need other things too, but like you got to start with good and bad. That's really important. And the thing is, with this universalization, with this flattening of the world, which is the same thing, universalism is flattening. It's a type of flattening. Equality, type of flattening. Don't do that. If equality is true, then evolution is at an end. All of it. No part of evolution works in an equal world. It doesn't function anymore. So that's good to know, right? You see all these evolutionary theorist people, or evolution believers, as I like to call them, talking about equality. And I'm like, bro, put you out of business. I don't know what to tell you, right? We're living in a time where, because of this flattening, anything that's not complicated, anything that's not like a grand narrative that ties a bunch of things together, in other words, simple truths, are suspect. There's a case going on right now in Massachusetts called the Karen Reed case. It's kind of nationally known because it's a woman who killed her husband. And I hate to break it to people, but it's fairly obvious that she's guilty as the day is long. I mean, one of the articles I read was talking about how in round 2, because there's a retrial somehow, which is, I don't know why these things happen. The court systems have to be blown up and rebuilt from scratch with good and bad in mind. I'm saying the defense is like, but she didn't say, I killed him, I killed him, I killed him. She only said it twice. Or it's not, I killed him, I ran him over, or I hit him. That's what it was. I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. No, she only said that twice. I'm like, well, 2 or 3 times doesn't really matter. But hey, if that's your defense, I guess you're guilty. Why this isn't obvious to everybody, I don't know. That one fact alone should tell you everything you need to know about the case, guys. It really should. But everybody wants more information, more knowledge, more. Right? It's like, no. That one thing right there tells you everything you need to know. She's not denying that she says I hit him twice. It's only denying that she said I hit him 3 times. But you hit him, right? So 2, 3, 10 doesn't really matter at that point. It's still wrong. It's still bad, right? Guilty. I don't need any more information. More information will not help, but it will confuse me and get me lost. Let me try to outline for you this myth of World War II. It's improper to talk about World War II because it cannot be. It doesn't happen without the Great War. And the treaty that tries to end the war as a result, but not the treaty itself. Like if you read the Treaty of Versailles you'll kind of get a feeling for what's going on and why it's bad. But if you ignore all the things that happen around that treaty and because of that treaty, and in spite of those things, that treaty was written, because that's what you really have to keep that in mind. Like, there's a bunch of players here trying to get a fair shake for Germany. Not that Germany didn't do something wrong or anything like that. Like, no one's saying like Germany should be allowed to skate free and get away with starting the Great War. No one's got that attitude about it. But France is being particularly vindictive, which is ironic because between France and Germany, they're the destroyers of all things, we'll say, in the age of Gnosis for sure. Ironic that we couldn't just wipe them both out and solve the problem for the rest of us. France is being ridiculously vindictive. At one point, France, I don't remember if this made it into the treaty or if it was just part of the drafts, but I think it did make it in the treaty though. They're asking for reparations in excess of the total GDP of the planet Earth. This is how unreasonable they are. They're being completely ridiculous. And one of the methods they're using to do this, we want financial reparations nonsense, is the trick of individualism. They're valuing people with money. That is a function of the end of the first act of the Great War. And again, you can't call World War I and World War II because that didn't happen. What happened was there was a Great War with a break in the middle, because one of two things was going to happen at the end of the first set of battles, we'll say, at the end of the first act of the Great War. Either there would be no Germans left on the planet, for real. Like, they were all going to get starved to death. Like, just looking at the treaty, they all would have starved to death. If you read contemporary sources, and I have, by the way, which is how I know this, because I did my research. This is before the internet. There was no internet. We're talking microfiche. The contemporaries after the Treaty of Versailles were basically convinced that in 5 years, Germany wouldn't exist, and those people would all basically be starved to death. Now, what kind of a vacuum that creates and what happens as a result, there's lots of theories. But nobody, no serious thinker, thought that Germany as a nation was going to exist in 5 years. 5 years. They thought it was all done. Now, the League of Nations, which is a precursor to the UN, failed to do anything useful about getting France to back off and not destroy Germany as a nation. And Germany's a relatively new nation. We can argue about whether or not Germany should have ever been a nation and all that nonsense. However, those arguments are important for the myth of World War II. If you start at World War II, you start with individualism. You start with the idea of human rights, because they wanted to put the Germans on trial and punish them publicly in a war for war crimes. But as we've outlined earlier, because at Dan Talks 1 is not wrong about this, the idea of law is specific in particular to your culture. Every country has laws. Sometimes localities have laws. Where I live, and in many other places, not in the state. Where I live, you have to cover the back of your pickup truck so that things don't fly out onto the road. That's not true of the surrounding towns. Right? Laws are specific things that are agreed upon. Whether you agree with them or not is irrelevant, but they're agreed upon by the people living there. And that's why they're changeable, right? We agree to follow these rules until we change them. And maybe they get changed in a way that you don't like and you don't agree, but you're still living there. So the fact that you're living there is the agreement. I hate to break it to you. Like, the agreement doesn't have to be explicit, right? You don't have to run down the list and say, well, I consent to all these laws in order to live here. No, you live here and therefore you consent to the laws, period. If you don't like it, move. If you can't afford to move, tough. It just, the world is that way, and it's never been any different for anyone else, and it's not going to be any different for you or anyone that comes after you, ever. That's not the way the world works. It's not physics, but it might as well be, right? There's certain ways in which things operate and ways in which they don't. Ways in which they don't, or any other way. Sorry. It is what it is. The groups impose, and you need them to survive. So you will be imposed upon as the result of your survival. If you don't like that, don't survive. Like, and people go, well, I don't understand nihilism. I understand nihilism all too well. It seems really easy to me. Sorry, you don't. But this treaty that gets set up, this idea of human rights, this concept of individualism as a primary way of thinking about things, we'll say, all comes from this idea of World War II. It's not World War II. It's not. The players are the same from World War I, pretty much, with very, very few differences. The ideologies at play haven't changed at all. So in the foxholes of the Germans are found copies of Thus Spake Zarathustra, which is Friedrich Nietzsche's novel. In both, quote, wars, they're still carrying around Nietzsche as a justification for their soldiers, as a way of indoctrinating their soldiers and keeping them motivated. Maybe a hint as to whether or not you should read or engage with Nietzsche, by the way. And that's really all you need to know. Like, if your so-called philosophy or ideology or whatever leads to a justification for mass slaughter of innocents and the moving of your borders through force, mechanized force, because the mechanized force part is actually super important. Again, you don't understand non-mechanized, you don't understand mechanized war if you don't understand non-mechanized war, and you have to go back before so-called World War I to understand that. Because the introduction of tanks is the Great War, the beginning of the Great War, not the middle of the Great War, which is this so-called World War II myth bullshit, because it's bullshit. You won't understand any of that, and you won't understand why this treaty was a big deal and how this treaty to end the conflict temporarily, because it only ended it temporarily, guys, is so seminal to our myth and our misunderstanding of everything in the world. I'm not being hyperbolic. Everything in the world has been affected by this nonsense. Not everyone, not every institution, but everything, including those institutions, right, has been affected by this myth. The treaty was so heinous, and the attempts to fix it were just not successful. It was so bad, the League of Nations eventually couldn't hold. I mean, unfortunately, we get the UN in exchange, which is downgrade of downgrades. Woodrow Wilson was heartbroken. Not that I'm a fan. I think he's a leftist communist scumbag, but he was a president, and he did good work as president of the United States. So he and I are okay, also communist scumbag. But, you would think didn't work. Good hint. Nope. They tried again. Now we get the UN. And we haven't figured out the UN doesn't work either, right? I mean, we're starting to figure that out. That myth is breaking apart again, right? This idea of global government as such is breaking apart. And it was all ginned up to do these trials as a result of this treaty and trying to resolve these conflicts. And there were a lot of conflicts to resolve, right? Ironically, the Great War is the result of a bunch of bad treaties that were interpreted in the worst possible way, which caused a global conflict. All of this is driven by a spirit, by the way, but that would involve talking about the Great War and not this myth of World War II, so I will not get into that here. If you want to hear about that, leave me a comment on this video, and maybe I'll do a video on it at some point. So this treaty and the attempt to create a treaty that doesn't destroy the German people, because that's very much what the Treaty of Versailles is attempting to do. I don't think there's any dissenting voices on that, except maybe in the UK, where their history departments are so corrupt that they don't understand what loyalists are, or that the East India Company was a monopoly, and all kinds of things that any idiot would know. That's Oxford history department, by the way. Probably Oxford's been all done for quite some time and no one noticed. Because this treaty is so disastrous, the other nations try to prop Germany up. So they dump a tremendous amount of money and resources into Germany after the Treaty of Versailles to try to assuage their guilt for not being able to prevent this tragedy against the German people, who, even with those efforts, it is still believed will not exist in 5 years. This is a big deal. No one ever talks about this. This is all pre this World War II imaginary time frame. Very middle out thinking, by the way. you don't understand middle out thinking, navigating patterns, video on middle out thinking. But this is perfect middle out thinking, World War II. Perfect. Perfect. Such a ridiculous frame. It's foolishness. It's total foolishness. All the interesting things that happened, we'll say, that happened to lead up to that second conflict, and all of the things that happened after that second conflict are all the result of things that happened at the Treaty of Versailles. Because we can't have the Treaty of Versailles again. And so we need a trial. We need a trial. Because we can't go through the Treaty of Versailles again. We have to placate the French somehow. Although why we don't bomb them into non-existence is beyond me, but that's a different video. At least Paris. Don't like Paris. So why is this form of middle out thinking so important, this new myth? Because there's a new evil. And it's a penultimate evil. It's evil incarnate in one human being, in one evil dictator. Now keep in mind, in Europe, after the first act of the Great War, there's dictators all over the freaking place, man. The whole dictator thing is kind of a big deal because Napoleon started it. The dictators are not unusual at this point. Sorry, they're just not. The beheading of the English king really causes a problem. And since then, we've been suffering. And if you don't believe me about that, you can watch the history videos in the history playlist on navigating patterns. Adam and I go over all this in those videos. So we've got dictators left, right, and center, but one of them is this penultimate evil. And that's fine, whatever. But also in the myth of World War II, there is no penultimate good. There are some heroes, some of whom are definitely not heroes, some of whom turn out to, by any standard, be as evil or more evil than the penultimate evil somehow. And because we have a new measure of just evil, by the way, there's no measure of good in the myth of World War II. That causes a reset of the culture. That's what it causes. It causes a cultural reset, wholesale. Just we go from a culture that understands, or cultures, I should say, that understand a bunch of stuff and know good from evil and understand the virtues and understand values and the importance of things. And they have fully formed countries. They have an understanding of hierarchy. All of that is gone. Most importantly, the understanding of hierarchy vanishes with the myth of World War II. But that didn't happen in World War II. That happened in the Treaty of Versailles because they wanted to value every individual killed that was French. They wanted to put a number on each of those people, a financial number. Okay, so that had already happened before the second conflict. It already happened. Why do we treat people like numbers? Well, I don't know. Probably because of the Treaty of Versailles, bro. I don't think it was done before that. Certainly not at that scale, for sure, right? And now, what's the result of having this myth? Well, one of the things is we kind of take for granted the technology that we have from that myth. And everything back before, quote, World War II was barbarian. These people are stupid. They didn't have this wonderful technology. It's kind of dangerous because if you're paying attention, and you're probably not, and fair enough, like this is hard. Your unconscious gets this, by the way. Nobody ever talks about the unconscious. Most important part of psychology is the unconscious. Nobody ever discusses it. Your unconscious is going to make the connection that we traded this war, this conflict, for this technology, because that definitely happened. Are they causally linked? That's a harder question to answer, I would have to say. Most certainly they are, but the proof for that is difficult and people will resist it because nobody wants to think, oh, we had to kill a bunch of French and Germans in order to get all the things we have, like nuclear power, right? Nuclear power is German. Rockets, German, like entirely German, by the way. There's 0% other countries, all German. Pretty much at least 90%, but probably 100% of particle physics. German. They're all Germans. Almost all of them are Germans. Everything that we say we have from the myth of science, which is a myth that comes out of World War II, or is trying to emerge from World War II, is the result of German technology. And I know I've said in the past, I think all of our technology, except possibly the transistor, is from Germany. Well, guess who has the first patent on transistor technology? Never built one, though, right? It's still Bell Labs is the first one to build a transistor. But the first patent comes from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the remnants of it. Kind of German, at least from the same place as the penultimate evil dictator. Interesting indeed. Interesting indeed. That would make, if you can make that case, and maybe you can't, and fair enough, that would make all the technology we have, actually all of it, the result of German peoples. All of it. We are living in the technology built from way before the Second World War, but no one talks about that because we're stuck in this stupid myth. And everything before World War II didn't exist if it was technological. All technology starts at World War II. And then it is attributed to the war. Now, attributed to the war might be correct because things like tanks and planes were definitely advanced because of war. Just as Leonardo da Vinci, most of his work is war machines because that's what people were paying for. And then he had spare time and he could do other things and make other things that maybe weren't obviously useful in war. And so he took advantage of that. That's a very common pattern historically, by the way. That's absolutely everywhere. Right? You get patronage. Some of your patronage is we need war machines. We need ways to be able to defend ourselves against our enemies or attack our enemies, to be perfectly fair. And therefore, this is how the patronage works. You seem like a smart guy. We'll give you some money. You invent some stuff. We'll build it. Right? Very old system, right? All gone because of what we tell ourselves about how things happened in World War II. And there is a reset of culture. But we do take it, take it for granted that everything before World War II is stupid. And because of the Treaty of Versailles, this idea of globalism sneaks up on us. It's really the Treaty of Versailles that causes this globalism nonsense. And it's not that those ideas weren't around. I read an article once, forget where it was from, but it was basically this guy talking about this entry that he found. It was a diary entry from 1915. And he was talking about global trade because he was part of the British Empire. So he was able to order anything from the streets of London delivered to him in Africa in a catalog in 1915. Globalism, at least in terms of trade, is not that new. In terms of government, it is the function of the Treaty of Versailles. As near as I can tell, I could be wrong. I'm not like a total expert on this, but I have actually researched it. And I did so before the internet. And I did so over many, many hours and many days and many weeks and many months and probably many years, right? So this is something I kind of know something about. And you can look this stuff up. Like I have tried to verify after the fact, and it's all still there. There might be other narratives around or something, but this myth of World War II and some of the things I'm telling you, or all the things I'm telling you, you can look them up. Like they're definitely still around. They might have competing views or whatever, and some of my views may be wrong. That's always possible, but I don't freaking think so. So what is it that we don't see post this myth of World War II, which didn't exist and didn't really happen that way? Not that there wasn't a war and lots of innocent people and guilty people didn't die, because of course they did. I'm not saying the facts are not the facts and they didn't happen. I'm just reframing the narrative because there's no such thing as World War II. It doesn't make any sense by itself because it wouldn't have happened on its own. Our world is still driven by the success of Germany. And to be fair, much of that success is due to our, as in the US specifically, but a lot of other countries too, investments to save the German people post the first act of the Great War. And the thing is, Germany, you have to understand, because this is absolutely vital, because you really don't understand what happened if you don't understand the following. Germany is devastated. They get a bunch of investment. They can't make that investment work as well as everybody expects until a certain penultimate, quote, evil comes along, by the way. So at the time, doesn't seem so bad because he effectively performs the miracle that becomes Germany. It goes from a devastated region of hyperinflation and no hope, with all of the brightest minds writing that it will not exist in 5 years, to the greatest success story of any country, of any time period that you can come up with. That includes the first industrial revolution in the United Kingdom and the second industrial revolution, the one in the United States. And it includes the third industrial revolution in the United States, which would be the ramp up for the second act of the Great War. And Germany outpaces everybody. It's, for all intents and purposes, especially from the perspective of what was happening at the time and what people were thinking about what would happen in the future, a miracle. So this one person meets with rousing success by taking advantage of the things that his country is being given and turns it into something that no one thought could happen. It's not that Germany survives. Germany becomes the most successful nation in a ridiculously small time frame, using technology, by the way. That's a big problem. Using material, using ridiculous amounts of money to be successful. And the thing is, all of our technology, all of it, and again, I made the case earlier for semiconductors even, and all of our philosophical thought is informed by and completely wrapped up in the second act of the Great War and the success of Germany in spite its complete and utter devastation. You have to understand that. You have to understand that. It's not, because people don't realize, it's not before the conflict that the German people are in love with the person that they ultimately vote democratically as their dictator. It's a little weird for us to think about, but that happened all the time in Europe, all the time, and after, if memory serves, after, all the time, democracy led straight to dictatorship. They didn't just elect him to office. They actually had another election to make him dictator for life. That was an election. That was a democratically elected person. So there's your democracy. Take your democracy and shove it where the sun don't shine. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. But nobody talks about that. Why? Because it happened before the war. This is some weird psychotic split. It's schizophrenia. Oh, we're just going to ignore all the stuff that happened before the whatever date you want to give for the conflict, because people give different dates. Right? Was it the invasion of Poland? Poland didn't exist until after the Treaty of Versailles, guys. I hate to break it to you. It didn't exist. It was part of Germany. That's why it may seem clear to us that that was the flashpoint, but it wasn't clear to them that that would be a flashpoint. It's still wrapped up in all of this. It's still part of what we think about the world and how we think about the world and how we make sense of the world. We're still caught in the web of this ridiculous myth of World War II. Once you understand that it was a miracle, and once you read about what actually happened, we'll say, during the rise of this dictator, there's all sorts of interesting little facts, like guns had been banned. So people tried bombing this person before they rose to power. And of course, the bombs didn't work because they're imprecise. And you don't want gun ownership, huh? Why? Why don't you want gun ownership? Seems like it would have solved the problem, or at least something that you identify as a problem, post-war. It's very complicated, right? Because now you're conflicted. Oh, maybe gun ownership for citizens is good because there were people willing to walk up and shoot people in the head back then in the beer halls when they were going on their little anti-Semitic rhetoric. That's correct. But they couldn't do that because they couldn't get any guns, because the Weimar Republic did not allow guns. They had to rely on bombs. They just killed a bunch of innocent people and solidified someone's idea that maybe they were divine because they kept getting attacked, and those attacks kept failing. Those attacks, by the way, started in the first act of the Great War. Once you kind of put all these pieces together, And then you find out what happened as a result of the rise to power and the follow me and we will not. It's like, well, if you're not going to do what's right for Germany, then we're going to have to do something to you, seize your assets, among other things. It's not an unreasonable and irrational, and it's certainly not evil to say, hey, if you're not going to play ball with your own country where you live, then we're going to seize your assets and use them to make the country great because you're unwilling to invest in the place in which you live. And it's also not unreasonable to say, hey, we're not investing in this project because everybody we've read says this project is going to fail. This is not an easy thing to untangle, guys. It's really not. It's really complicated when you get right down to brass tacks. But what is easy is to realize everybody around the world, not just the German people, thought of this one dictator as a hero, as a miracle worker, doing something no one else thought could be done. Forget about the time frame. The time frame for the rebuilding of Germany is not even realistic today. If you told me today you could do that, I'd be like, I don't know, man. I don't think so. I don't think all the money in the world can do that. And I'd be right, by the way, because it's not the money that does the work. It's the power of the strength of the character of the person. And that includes their charisma. Charisma and the knowledge and understanding of its importance is definitely one of the most important things that we have lost in the myth of World War II. But I'll cover that later. So you have to understand the line of extreme progress, we'll say material progress, begins in the late 1800s in the US. That's where it begins. And it's in the US and people wanting to follow the US. And this is not unprecedented, right? Like, really, the UK, they're the Industrial Revolution. We stole the technology from them. We really did. You can look that up. History of the City of Lowell, where I grew up. If you want to challenge me on that, you can. You'll definitely be wrong. There's something I know for sure. Well researched, well studied. Why is it called Lowell, Mark? Because the guy who stole the technology from England had an eidetic memory and wrote it all down and brought it back. And his investors, because that's how all of that will always work forever, as a thank you to him, among other things, named the city after a city that they built. It was a planned city. Lowell was a planned city. So the idea of modernization becomes a thing. Modernization is seeing what the UK and now the US, that upstart colony, which fawns over Europe, by the way, to this day, for some stupid reason, the progenitors of. Right? Russia sees this, they want to modernize. This happens long before the first war, the first act of the Great War. This idea of modernization and upgrading and sort of adopting materialism as a measure and as a way of running your society, as a priority within what you're doing, right? We're not all going to live as farmer peasants. There was a big argument with the founding fathers of the United States over this. So this argument goes way back before industrialization. Before industrialization, this is an argument. What kind of society do you want to have? You want a society of cities or a society of farmers, roughly speaking? It's a little bit more nuanced than that, but I don't have time to get into the ridiculous details of that history. Just know that this is an old argument. It predates the myth of World War II. It also causes the myth of World War II. So countries are copying the success of the US and the UK, to be fair, because the UK did it first, through this thing called modernization. Now, I've talked about the word modern and my hatred of it in a video on navigating patterns. You can check that video out. The idea of progress through materialism, roughly speaking, begins to dominate and measure, which had already been introduced by the success of Napoleon. And again, history videos with Adam. If you don't believe me, it's all there. Really flips the script. Right now, things are quantity over quality. Because ultimately, city versus farm is quantity versus quality all day long. quantity of people, quantity of things that they can have, how many people can you get in an area, right? All of these things. And there's a place for cities, there's a place for farms. I'm not going to go after cities. I think cities of a certain size. I live outside the capital city of South Carolina. Thank you very much. Beautiful size city. Some days I wish it was a little larger. Some days I wish it was a little smaller. I'm pretty happy. I live in the woods on 12 acres with a pond. I have access to everything within half an hour. Everything I could want. I don't have an Apple store. I want an Apple store. I got to drive an hour and change, an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending upon which bigger city I want to go to. I want to fly. I got to drive an hour and 15 minutes, but I can fly internationally. It's a pretty good trade-off. So I'm not Boo City. I'm not Boo Farm. And I'm very much living in the middle, although this is as farm as it gets. Right? If I weren't sick, I could do something with my 12 acres, but as it is, I cannot. This progress, this argument switches from quality to quantity. And you have to understand that to understand why France is like, we're going to put a number on each individual that was killed in this first conflict of the Great War. And that's what we're going to use to destroy our foes, the Germans. We're basically going to wipe them out because it's basically what they're doing or trying to do. And no one can stop it and they all feel bad. It's really important. It's really important to understand that. Like, you're just not going to get the world that we're in if you don't understand what led up to this myth. And the thing is, we've been living off bad stories by bad storytellers, these flat worlder materialists, for far too long. And it's starting to break apart. A bunch of other things are happening at the same time. So what's happening at the same time? The rise of psychology. Psychology is an individualistic frame that is wrong about everything, by the way, that leads to these tactics and techniques that will say people higher in the hierarchy with a different, say, sight or vision of the world can then use against other people. This did not exist before. It's not that those systems or ways of operating weren't there. It's that they were guarded, held close, and only granted to people of a certain class. Because of the late 1800s, the world is flattening. Because of the success of the United States specifically, the world is flattening. The US is a very unique and interesting and weird place. Very strange. It validates a bunch of things, right? It validates this idea of Protestantism as a successful way to move forward in the world, which it cannot be, by the way. And that's part of what's breaking down, is the lie of Protestantism, and its success is becoming more clear. You actually know this quite clearly, right? Because if you read something like Albion Seed, which, to be fair, I have not read, or you understand the history that Albion Seed is talking about, the Protestants were fighting each other in the U.S. Tooth and nail, right? That was the thing. They were battling, just like they were in Europe. No difference. It's only the revolution that puts mostly an end to most of that. Up until the Civil War. Civil War is an upgrade to the battles pre-Revolutionary War, but along very clear lines, which is to say private versus public Protestantism. Wonderful, wonderful concept by Colin Woodard, or at least that's where I read it, in American Nations. Wonderful book. Got to read American Nations to understand the U.S. You're not going to understand the U.S. without it. But those bad stories told by bad storytellers are wrapped up in this idea of psychology. Because psychology appears to explain at the, quote, individual layer, which doesn't exist, by the way. You're not an individual. You never have been. You never will be. No one else has ever been an individual or will ever be an individual. You're a person connected to other persons, connected to yourself, connected to nature. Sorry, you can't be left alone, as Carl Benjamin would like. Don't know why he's saying that. It's so weird. He didn't learn from Gamergate, I guess, which he was in the middle of. These stories are weaponized through psychology. Many of these stories are weaponized in a way that we now call marketing. Now, marketing is not the weaponized stories or weaponized myths. That's not what marketing is. However, you can certainly do that with marketing techniques. Marketing does not necessarily have techniques. It's the function of the failure of the church or the recession of the church. In the US, the church did not recede so much as it never formed, right? Because we don't have Christendom. Didn't happen here. There's no Christendom in the US. There never was. So we've been living off these bad stories told by poor storytellers, usually to get something that they want, like maybe an understanding of the myth of World War II. Let me just scan real quickly at Dan Talk's tweet here. Liberalism is a belief and an attempt to universalize the Western tribe to everyone. Okay, to some extent, I can see why you would say that. That is not what liberalism is. Liberalism is based on the idea of the individual, which is based on Rousseau, ultimately. You can say it predates Rousseau. I really don't care. Rousseau's the guy. Okay. And the misunderstanding of Descartes, which is super important. I just for some reason noticed it today. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. People confuse this with thinking is what I am. And then you have retarded people speaking on Christian Bachelor's live stream in the live chat about being a thinking person and all this nonsense way of thinking about the world that doesn't work because they were told bad stories by bad storytellers. So, and John Vervaeke actually goes into this, right? Not Descartes didn't get it wrong, but everybody that came after him misunderstood his work. I agree. Also, they're bad storytellers telling bad stories. And we've been living off that for too long. It's breaking down. The great revealing is here. I've been talking about this past few live streams. The revealing is here. What it will reveal, I do not know. Everyone's going to see different things, obviously, because it's a big world and there's a lot of lies out there and they're all getting exposed. And what you're exposed to is going to be somewhat unique to you at a group level and at a personal level, because there's no such thing as an individual level, as I have covered before. The best way to think about what's happening is not necessarily the end of the myth of World War II, although that is a good way. It's the end of materialism. Materialism is a better way to think about it. It's not the end of modernity. Modernity is a bad term. See my video on navigating patterns for why this has to be the case. I make the case there. The case is fairly unassailable. Now, it's not the myth that's ending. It's the end of materialism as a way of dealing with, understanding, and manipulating the world that is causing the myth to fail. So materialism, appropriately, is the ground reality that we've been trying to operate under that doesn't work. We think it's the ground reality because the thing above it, the myth of World War II, has been very persuasive. So we have been using materialism and only materialism to understand and manipulate our world. It just turns out that that doesn't work. Now, it works 90% of the way or so. Why 90%, Mark? Pareto principle. Taleb talked about it first. Peterson also talked about it, though. Not wrong. Very important. All natural curves are Cauchy curves, or follow the Pareto principle. The 80-20 rule, but it's a 90-10 rule because it's a curve with two ends. The end of materialism proves that the myth of World War II doesn't hold anymore, right? That materialism is failing us and is causing panic. The tricks that worked for political parties to have any power at all in the United States, the Democrats, no longer work. They have run out. They no longer function. The material way of implementing these tricks has failed. There's lots of reasons for this. One is the rise of the internet, by the way, right? And once you have competing sources of truth or competing potential sources of truth, and one source of truth fails, this is the fall of the fourth estate. See my video. That's actually a really good video. Most important video on the channel, I think, is fall of fourth estate. Like, if you want to understand what's going on now, the fall of the fourth estate is really seminal to understanding exactly what the hell happened, right? Because we have the crumbling of the fourth estate and the rise of the internet. Now, the internet was there first. It didn't rise. It could have risen at any point, actually, right? By any measure. But it only rose when the fourth estate was so obviously fallen that it couldn't be ignored anymore. That's when people flooded to like the Joe Rogans of the world. It happened before that. Gamergate is definitely the turning point. I have a video on 2014. It's one of the live streams. You can watch that for more on that, right? So all of this is causing panic. It's causing more chaos. The destruction of a myth is no joke, and it's not good. It's not going to help us. I mean, we needed to get out of it. So in the long term, this is a good thing, but also this is not good. And we're just at the beginning. Things are going to get a hell of a lot worse. I hate to say it, but sorry, bro. And the thing is, this myth is bad because it's flat. It doesn't talk much about hierarchy. It doesn't help us understand the hierarchical nature of the world. In World War II myth, there are individuals and they're independently valued through money. It's right in the Treaty of Versailles, bro. It sneaks into the World War II myth. And because they're all individuals and because the world is flat, we can put war criminals on trial, which is completely insane. No one ever did anything like that before. And it's not that the losers weren't punished, but they weren't punished in a court. There's no such thing as a court of human rights. That doesn't make any sense. Why are we causing a war and then subsequently trying to fix a war using treaties? Because that's what happened. It's all legalism. What is going on? And this is why the age of gnosis is what flattens the myth. And the age of gnosis predates probably the printing press is where I'm going to put the age of gnosis right now, where knowledge becomes the highest value over time, right? Not right away, but over time. Knowledge becomes the highest value and knowledge becomes propositions. Why? Because spoken and written words become the way to manipulate the world post-Reformation. The importance of you as a person having access to a book and that determining what tribe you're in, roughly speaking, and the flattening to tribalism, which, at Dan Talks goes into tribalism, doesn't understand it at all, flattens everything to tribalism. So basically he's stuck in the myth of the Reformation. Doesn't understand the world outside of that. Fair enough. We lost the kings. It's hard to understand proper hierarchy. This is what happened. This is what happened. The age of gnosis drives us towards the flat myth. We were already primed for it. It just didn't have an outlet. People were still persons before the Great War. In the Great War, they become casualties on a sheet, and those casualties get converted into dollars. And all of that gets wrapped up and lost in the milieu. And then the miracle is covered up. Any goodness, any recovery from the flattening of the world, from the first act of the Great War, is hidden. It's all bulldozed over. And what we're left with as a result is the myth of World War II, where there's only one bad guy. There's no good guy. There's a couple of heroes. Don't tarnish their name, Daryl Cooper, also who does a poor job. If you're going to go after Churchill, there's reasons to do it. You're just so historically ignorant. You didn't know what they were, you moron. Don't pretend like there's dog whistles. People say what they mean and mean what they say. This isn't that hard. And the thing is, the size of your myth matters. And the World War II myth was pretty big. What will it hold and for how long? That's what the size of your myth does. Well, guess what? We know how long the World War II myth will hold and what it will hold. And we're over that now. The limits have been breached. And what is the order? It's a new world order. Why would anybody think there'd be a new world order? Because we had one. We had a cultural reset as a result of this myth of World War II. Nobody ever talks about the good parts of World War II or the lead up to that conflict. Nobody talks about the miracle. Miracles are gone from the world. Miracles vanish from the world and are replaced with technological wonders. Did you ever notice that? I bet you never noticed that, did you? Miracles at scale of whole countries are bulldozed over as a result of the myth of World War II and replaced with technological wonders like going to the moon. It's not a miracle. It's a technological wonder. Isn't that weird? I bet you're not a skeptic now about the myth of World War II and its flattening and the loss of hierarchy. So all you're left with are everyday miracles. Okay. Somebody who couldn't walk can walk. Somebody's cured of cancer, or as my buddy Nick was, diabetes, right? Okay. Well, now small players can manipulate you in their little church. There's no bigger church to mediate these small miracles. All you have are small miracles. Everything else is a technological wonder. It's a wonder. It's not a miracle. You know how it was done. I've got the paperwork right here. Shows the entire provenance of how we did this thing. Except, of course, it doesn't. But, it's a new world order. Why not? We did it once before. We just set up a new world. These people at their first attempt with the League of Nations to set up a new global world order failed. But the UN, not bad, did much better, lasted much longer. We've done it twice. Why can't we do it again? See that pattern anywhere? Anyone? Bueller? WEF? Yuval Harari? What do you think they're doing? They're following a pattern. Following a pattern that's a result of the myth of World War II. So what's the solution here? What do we do about this? What are we going to do without the myth of World War II? The thing is, we had the answer and we need it back. And in order to get it back, we must go back. And the thing is, this is, the John Vervaeke's of the world, and I think Peterson said this too, that, we can't go back. Oh, no, we will go back. We're going back. There ain't no question about that. When you make a misstep and you continue to misstep, what happens is you go back. You go back through collapse. Closer to what Jared Diamond talked about in Guns, Germs, and Steel. Excellent book, by the way. Unfortunately, his conclusions are completely nuts, especially at the end of his book, Collapse. He's just wrong about that. But he's not wrong about collapse. He's a little bit wrong about cutting down the last tree. That didn't happen. Some people just don't think things through. Good ideas, they don't think them through. We're going back. The question is, do we plan the going back? Or do we collapse? Right now, we're going to collapse because of people like Vervaeke, people like Peterson, people like Paul Vanderklay, who did not understood the problem well, apparently, but could not manage it, right? So we're going to collapse, it looks like. Hopefully not. There could be a miracle, a country level or nation level miracle, depending upon which terminology you want to use, because our terminology is all messed up because of the myth of World War II. What did we have in the past, Mark? What are you talking about? Before, we had empires. An empire was run by a king who could also be emperor, but only to the abstraction that was empire. Empire is an abstraction. To each individual country or region in his empire, he was a king with a specific title. That is the proper hierarchy, at least the top of it. Underneath him were noblemen. There's the noble class, right? Underneath that are the administrators. We now call it the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy was forever. You never get around bureaucracy. That's not the problem. The problem is you're stupid. That's a different problem. That's what we had. We had this deep hierarchy. How did the king become king? He was crowned by the bishop. That's how the king became king. How did this get ruined? Well, we beheaded the English king, and then we got Napoleon. Those two things are completely related. See the history videos with Adam. We outline them in there. This is a big deal. We lost proper hierarchy. Totally lost it. Why is that important? What are you talking about? Why is it that somebody like Pastor Paul Vanderklay can identify the problem? Oh, somebody needs to catch to people where Jordan Peterson left off and take them the rest of the way. But then he can't implement it. Well, I'll tell you why. Because of the myth of World War II. It constrains what they are willing to do, what tools they think they have available, and which tools they're willing to use. I hate to break it to you, but I have a strong suspicion. I'm not going to make this an outright statement because I can't. But I have a suspicion that pretty much every single person that talks about the problems of today and how to solve them, and then says, well, Russia wasn't any better. Mao was horrible. Pol Pot, educated in Paris, might be a hint. These were all bad things, right? They're all liberals or leftists. But we can't take control of things through charisma. I think all of those people almost certainly necessarily must believe that communism or some form of socialism would have worked but for the popular dictators. I think they all believe that. I really do. I see a lot of indications that that's true. I think that every single one of them, the only thing preventing them from making a better world is their fear of their own charisma. Charisma is a fact of the world. It exists. If people with good aims, good intent, and good ability or high competence are not willing to, who also have charisma, we'll say, more than the normal amount of charisma, are not willing to make the sacrifice of a leadership, then we're screwed. And if they're doing this out of the fear of becoming an evil 20th century dictator, which is exactly what I think is happening, then they're probably socialist believers who think socialism works, and I don't want them in charge anyway. But also, like, someone got to take charge. And I think no one's taking charge, and no one wants to lead, at least at that scale. Because all the people that might have a chance at doing that, or at getting together and assigning somebody to lead, say a la ARC, or even the WEF, because those are the same project, just on, quote, different sides, even though they're on the same side and they don't know it. I think that's where the problem is. I think that's exactly where the problem is. They won't get together because they're afraid of their own charisma. They're afraid of leadership. They don't want to make the sacrifice. Leadership is a sacrifice, the likes of which you cannot imagine unless you have had to lead. I have been stuck leading many times. I don't like it. But someone has to do it, and it sucks. You can't trust the people around you anymore, even when you could yesterday, right? It's harder to see people change because you have a different relationship to them. You're suddenly above them when you weren't before. All kinds of things change when you're in a leadership position. And that puts you at certain types of disadvantages. And that's a sacrifice. You have to take responsibility for a bunch of stupid people who are doing things despite you telling them not to, and then you have to take the hit. Leaders do that. Good leaders do that. That's what they do. That's how it works. Take care and be better, because the world needs you to be better.